Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Miss Joy Smith, and I'm one of the faculty liaison librarians at the Alma Jordan Library. And this afternoon, we're going to be looking at citing with ACS. Now, I am the librarian who also oversees for FST. And that means I'm the one who deals with ACS, but we do have another supporting librarian who helps at times. I don't know if some of you may be familiar with her, but maybe the one she dealt with her out of the system right now. But her name is Miss Michelle Gill, and she would have been here today, but she had some unforeseen circumstances. So we're going to look at referencing style ACS. Just to note, I don't mind being interrupted. So if you have a question, you can put up your hands or put it in the chat. You can chat, unmute your mic and speak. That's fine. So let's start because we don't have much time. We need to cite work because when we write our papers, we do research. We are not coming up with it from our own heads, and we use other people's work. So if we use other people's work, it's our ethical obligation to acknowledge them. And citing and referencing is one way we acknowledge the use of others' works. Also, we cite because it helps not just us, the reader, the examiner, whoever it is, it helps them to also identify and locate previous works. Sometimes they're working on a paper themselves, and based on your citations, they are able to access a paper that's pretty useful to them. Also, you are building on the work of others, and that's another reason why you should cite. And we have a number of reasons listed there, which I think you're familiar with. The one I want to zero in on, though, is to avoid plagiarism. Because when we cite, it's not just giving credit, we are acknowledging, but you're showing that, research is built on a community. And in order for your work to stand and have its worth, you want to do it. And plagiarism is an issue that we have been faced with. I know coming out of COVID, our stats were high in terms of plagiarized work, but we hope now that, things have settled back and that persons are using the works of other researchers ethically. Some things to note about plagiarism. UE has an anti-plagiarism policy. There are two levels of offenses or breaches. The first one is deemed minor, and you may lose some marks at the discretion of your first examiner. Level 2, however, it's where the offense is deemed deliberate. So there's this deliberate attempt to use other person's work unethically, and there are consequences. This one carries a penalty of getting 0 for the paper, getting 0 for the course, getting 0 for the semester, and it goes all the way up to being expelled. So this is a serious issue that you need to pay attention to. And there are other ways to avoid plagiarism besides citing and referencing. We cannot go into that now, but I do have sessions on referencing. Today we're just going to touch on a few things, but you can write to me and request that you want a session on referencing, and that's fine. I'll sit with you and we can go through the ACS style guide. Now, another thing to note is that Turnitin, I don't know how many of you were in this session before that SITS had. Turnitin has an AI writing detection feature. So it's able to distinguish between AI and human written text. Be very careful when you use things like ChatGPT, and there are others out there, to write your papers. Now, this is not to say you can't use them, but if they help you with getting information, you need to do what we call lateral reading. You need to go and check to see if this is really so. Go and see what else has been published. Now, ChatGPT has been known to make up references as well. Therefore, you need to be careful. I have had requests to get some documents for somebody, and when I looked it up, I couldn't find it anywhere. And I was like, where did you get these from? And he said, well, one of the AI tools recommended these for reading, but they don't exist. So be careful with that, right? And if I ask ChatGPT if it wrote the piece of the paper that I detect was not written by the student, it will admit to having done so. So you have to be careful. We're going to look at the new ACS guide this afternoon. I know some of you are still using chapter 14 of the previous edition. How many of you are familiar that or familiar with this new guide? Can you raise your hand or just put it in the chat? It's called the ACS Guide to Scholarly Communication. Is anybody familiar with it? Okay, so what have you been using? Have you been using chapter 14? Because that's the old guide. What have you been using? Again, I note that lecturers have been telling students to also just find a journal article and follow the formatting there. That is incorrect. There is a guide. Use the guide, because when you do your theses or your papers, if they come before me, I am using the guide to check your formatting and your referencing. So then you have to change it. So just use the guide. So now you know there is a guide, okay? And I'll show you where to locate the guide and how to use it. So this guide has been outdated for years now. And I have written to the chemistry department to indicate this, but you are in the session, so you know, and you can tell your classmates. Since 2021, we have started using this guide. So this is the guide that should be used. It's an online resource, so it's no longer printed. And this is good because updates are done regularly. And you have new chapters that deals with open access and machine readable data, because now we are having a lot of electronic publications. So rather than printing a book, they've opted for doing an online guide. The other good thing about this guide is that you can get illustrations and you have links to videos and other materials. When they talk about something, sometimes they include an example. You click on the link and it carries you to a journal article or something that shows what an example of the guidelines that they are telling you about. In order to access this guide, you are going to the library's website. You're going to go to a section called Research Guides, and then Citing and Referencing. I have it here. You can see I've put a red box over the section so that you can see. And then you would click on Science and Technology. And finally, you would see this ACS Guide to Scholarly Communication. You click on it and it will take you to the online resource. We will go to it in a little while. There are 6 sections in the guide, and the part that we are going to pay attention to this afternoon is part 4. But all the other sections are important because the style conventions, scientific journals, scientific communication, which is very important in terms of how you write your paper, all of that is outlined here. I would encourage you to go and check all the sections. The sections are collapsible, so if you expand, you will be able to see all the subheadings and you can go and explore them in your own time. 4 editors are responsible for the updated version, and their names are noted here. Section 4 deals with the things that we put in the paper. So the graphics, your figures, tables, references. We're going to take a look at that this afternoon. Styling conventions, citing sources within the text, and also citing sources in a reference list are some of the things that we're going to pay attention to, and we're going to look at examples, and we're also going to explore the guide. ACS has certain requirements, and these requirements extend to in-text citations and also to the reference list. In-text citations, we need to pay attention to direct quotes, also paraphrased and summarized sentences, and tables and figures. Those are very important. And then in the reference list, which occurs at the end of the paper, you have to give full bibliographic information. The rules have changed from that old guide for some entries, therefore you need to pay attention. Now, a reference list differs from a bibliography in that everything in your in-text citation should be found in your reference list. In a bibliography, you may add materials that you consulted but not cited in your paper. So that's how it differs from a reference list. So everything in your reference list should have a correlation in your in-text citations. In other words, each number must have a reference list entry. You need to pay attention to things like punctuation and spacing because that's very important as well. Let's look at the in-text citations. There are 3 ways to insert your in-text citations. There's a parenthetical numbering system where the number is on the line and it's in parentheses and italicized. Then you have the superscript numbers, and this is the one I think most people are familiar with and use. And this one is used for ACS publications, but I also know that a lot of you use them in your paper. So the number is superscripted at the appropriate place in your paragraphs or in your sentences. And then there's also an author date referencing system where you do not use numbers, but you use the author's surname and the year of publication. I have seen instances where students mix like 2 of these. That's not recommended. You really should choose one and stick with it. Let me just ask, which system do you use in your papers? Number 2, okay. And the rest of you? 2 persons said number 2. Does anybody use author date? Okay, I'm not seeing author date. Right, so it's mostly number 2. Hi, Kimberly. All right, so it's number 2. So this afternoon, I am going to zero in on number 2. If there's anyone who uses any of the other systems, let me know. Is there anybody who use author date or parenthetical numbering? Because I stripped the slides to only reflect superscript numbering because I realized people don't really use author date. Is there anybody who use number 1 or number 2? No? Okay, so we're going to stick with superscript. I see 1 person. Right, good. So these are just some guidelines when you're using the superscript system, right? It starts with number 1, and you're numbering consecutively for all items referenced. And this is for text and non-text. So in your tables and figures, you would use it. Now, I did say for tables and figures in your captions, do not use superscript numbers. What you're supposed to do is put a full reference entry. Okay, remember that. Don't put table 1 colon and you put your caption and then you put number 2. Don't do that. You need to put a full, so you have to put the word source and then colon, and then you put a full citation of what you used or where you took the information from. If it's for a table or if it's for a figure, if you adapted it, modified it, you need to see. The number appears after the punctuation at the end of the sentence or clause, but of course it can also be within the sentence. It doesn't have to be at the end of the sentence, but if it is, it's outside the punctuation with no space. Right. You reuse the number, the original number, if you're referring to the same reference. No need to put another number. That would be chaos. It's the same number. If you have multiple references at one time, list the numbers in ascending order and separate them by commas without spaces. I have examples of each of these. So it will be 1, 2, 3, right? If they are part of a consecutive series, use an n dash to indicate a range of 3 or more. So don't put 1 to 2. That is 1, 2. But if it's 1 to 3, then you would put 1 n dash 3. Now, the author's name can be part of the sentence, or you don't need to mention the author's name at all. But if you do, he's in the sentence, and you would put the superscript number after his name, no space. If you have two authors and you're using them as part of your sentence, you would put the author's name, and after the second one, you put the number. If you have more than two authors, you use et al. So you can say White et al. And then you put the 12 after the dot, no space. Notice things, et al. Is not italicized. There's no comma after the dot for al and the superscript number. And you always have to make sure you have a period here or a full stop. Sorry. Right, more than one paper by the same author with more than one co-author. There are rules. So you list the principal author's name, which is the first author, and then you would put and co-workers, or you could put and colleagues. And this is how you would do it. Remember, there's no space between the numbers. If you have multiple references in one citation, again, we do not use the n dash here because this is not a range. It's actually different numbers. So it's 1, 3, and 9. And that's how we would use it. You separate them by commas without spaces. Now, the n dash, how many of you are familiar with it? We usually use a hyphen. It's not a hyphen. The n dash is a longer dash than a hyphen. Okay, and that's what you use when you're doing a range of numbers. To get an n dash, there are keyboard shortcuts. So you would use Control, and for those of you who are using a desktop, Control and minus on the numeric keypad. That's to the right of the keyboard, not the one above the text, because it wouldn't insert it like that. If not, you can go from symbols and insert it. If I switch to a Word document, I will show you where you can get it. But the n dash is longer than a normal dash, okay? Hyphens are really for names and like if you're joining two compounds together and so on. But sometimes we use them incorrectly. It's the n dash. Right, and of course, you're using it like this. This is an example of it in a range. Some things to note. If you have values where you have a negative number expressed, you should not use the hyphen or the n dash, okay? Because that is going to be confusing. You need to switch to words. So you would say things like minus 22 plus 120 key. Do not put a dash here, whether it's a hyphen or the n dash. It's going to be confusing. So you have to switch to words. Also, when you start your range with words, so if you say from 500 to 600, you really should not use an n dash in the middle here. Use words. If you start with from, to. And these are other instances when you would use the N dash, right? You have two names. This is not a double barrel. This is actually two persons coming together to create a law or theory or something. You would use the N dash as well. And of course, it can also be used when you want to infer the words and, to, or versus. Where do you insert your text citations? You must look for logical places to put it so that, you know, when you're reading, it makes sense. So if you have a sentence with these phrases, you can consider in putting in your citation right after then. So if you say recent investigations, put your number. Other developments, put the number right there. Was reported, number, as described previously, a molecular mechanics study, the procedure of Lucas et al., put it right there. These are just some suggestions of where to place your superscript numbers. If you have direct quotes, there are rules for inserting them. So up to 3 sentences, you place before punctuation that is not part of the quotation. So you'd put your number there. If the quotation ends in a full stop, then you put it after the full stop. If the full stop is not part of the quotation, then you put the superscript number before the full stop. Right? If your quote is rather long, more than 50 words, you have to do certain things. So you have to change the line spacing. If you were using 1.5 spacing, you now have to use single line spacing. You narrow the column width on both sides and do not use quotation marks. I will go to a Word document and demo after. I don't want to be switching back and forward with sharing the screen. I'll show you how to do the block quotations for ACS. It's different than other styles. All right, let's talk about figures. Now, figures is a catch-all term for graphs, photos, sketches, flowcharts, and all of that. So don't have figure 1.2 or photo 1. Actually, you shouldn't be using 1.2. Photo 1 or photo 2. They're all figures. Just label them as figures. So a figure is supposed to communicate the basic point at a glance, and it shows trends and relationships. They should be numbered in sequential order. So figure 1, figure 2, figure 3, figure 4, figure 5. I have seen chemistry students using double numeration. So they would put figure 1.1, figure 1.2, 1.3, but I have not seen that recommended for this style. And of course, if your figure has parts, you should be consistent with how you label that. So it should be figure 1A, figure 1B. If you're doing caps, do caps. If you're doing common, do common. Okay, you can use alphabetical numbering, or you can use Roman numerals. It's up to you. And this is what has been recommended. I forgot to mention that when I have these numbers in red next to the heading, that's the rule that in the online guide, that's the rule it falls under. So if you go straight to that section, you would see what I'm talking about. All right. For tables, now we do use tables anyhow, for want of a better phrase. But there are rules for including tables in our papers and in our theses. Number one, there are times when you need to use a table. So we would use a table when data cannot be presented clearly as narrative. You need to see that relationship in tabular form. You need to represent many precise numbers. That's another time you would use a table, and you want to show interrelationships in tabular format, because you might want to show this column against this row and so on, right? That's when you would use a table. The word table is capitalized. Again, tables are also numbered sequentially, and they need to be called out or discussed before they appear. And so in your paragraph, you should have as seen in or as shown in table 1, or in parentheses, some people just put see table 1, see figure 1, see figure 2. That's how you really should do it. They should not be, they shouldn't just appear without being called out first. The other thing is you cannot discuss table 2 before you discuss table 1. So they need to go in that sequential order when you include them in your papers. There are times when we shouldn't use tables, and these are some of the times. A table should have 3 or more interrelated columns and rows. So if you only have 2 rows, you really should try writing out your information as text or narrative. If you have 3 columns that do not relate to each other, so there is no relationship, then it's not a table and it's really a list. I have seen in ACS where they recommend unprofessional tables where you do not give it a number and you do not put a title. Well, you put a title, but you don't number them, okay? Table titles and figure titles should be brief and they should be in non-sentence format. And don't say things like table showing. There's no reason, no need to put that because we are looking at the table. So just say what the table is. If you're showing, this is not a chemistry example, but if you're showing enrollment over the last 5 years in the Faculty of Science and Technology, that's all you say, enrollment of students in Faculty of Science and Technology from 2020 to 2022. And that's all you need. It does not have to be a proper sentence. That is why table captions do not end in a full stop, neither figure captions, because they should not be in sentence format in the first place. It's non-sentence format. If you need to explain what's going on in the table, we suggest notes. ACS says footnotes, but you can feel free to just put a note below the table and explain what's going on. But do not try to do that in the caption. The caption really should be brief. These are placed here so that you can know there are rules for them. I'm not going to go into every one of them, but they'll be in the slide. So if you want to see that, you can also zero in on this, right? Number in chemical structures and number in chemical reactions. They follow a different sequence from your tables and figures, and your labeling should reflect that. It's Arabic or Roman, whichever one you choose. Don't be interchanging, stick with one and just put them, insert them in your paper. So before I go to the reference list, I think I will go to the guide so you can see some of this for yourself. So let me just stop sharing here. Do you have any questions in the meantime?
Excuse me, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
If I have compounds in my thesis from one chapter to another, is it okay to use different compound numbers in every chapter? Am I making sense? So what I'm saying is, okay, so chapter 1, I have compounds 1 to 100. Chapter 2, can I start from 1 again, or do I need to go for 101?
I think you should continue.
Okay.
Because then you would have 2 number 1s, you may have 2 number 2s. So I think you should just continue rather than going, starting over again.
But what if different chapters deal with different reactions or different compounds? Does it matter?
We'd have to see what the guide says about that. So
okay.
Just now, let me pull up. Oh, it's on Zoom, Alma Jordan Library. I'll show you where you can go to find out the information, and you can
Look it up.
explore. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
You see, if it's a manuscript-based thesis, I can kind of understand, but I'm thinking it should continue. Is anybody here doing a manuscript-based thesis? I don't really see it for chemistry. Okay. So I'm going to the library's homepage, which is listed here. You would get it in the slides, but you can just type in the Alma Jordan Library in Google and it will carry you to the website. And in order to get to the guide, remember, help and about, and we go citing and referencing, and science and technology. So you then go by your faculty, okay? Because it's divided like that, science and technology. And then you would see chemistry, MPhil and PhD students only. So we go to the ACS Guide to Scholarly Communication. Right. And these are all the sections. You see, they have been enlarged here, so expanded. You can see all the different subheadings, and you can choose whichever ones. Now, they dress down further. So 1.5 can go into 1.5.1 and so on and so on and so on. As you go into it, you will see that. Okay. We're going to look at section 4, which is where we are at now. And we spoke about chemical structures, chemical conventions. So this is where I would come and look to see what they say about them, because they tell you how to include them in the paper. All right. So I'm just showing you where you can go and you can explore it for yourself. We spoke about tables, and they have all the rules, when to use tables and all the guidelines. So this one is where they say it's not really a table, and some people put them as tables, but they're not. So they have examples that show you exactly what they're talking about. Parts of a table, they will also show you how to do it. Are you familiar that professional tables have three, well, they call it rules, horizontal rules, or three horizontal lines? They do not really have columns. Have you experienced that in reading your journal articles? Have you seen that? Yes. So some of you have, some of you haven't. So professional tables do not have columns. They have two horizontal lines at the top where you will see the different headings. And then they have one line at the bottom of the table saying this is the end of the table. Right? That's how they would usually do it. So they are showing you the parts of a table. Now, you remember, when I spoke about tables, I also said that you don't use the superscript numbers for the source if you took it from somewhere. This is what you do. Let me just know, are you seeing my screen? I am on ACS Publications. Okay, good. Right. So this is what you do. You put the word source, colon, and then you say adapted from, and you put the full thing as you would put it in a reference list. That's how you treat with tables and figures. You do not put table 1. You see the caption here, and then you put the number right here, the superscript number. No, you have to put a source note, okay? We call it a source note. And if you want to explain anything in the table, of course, you would put a note under the source note. That's how you should really do it. So they tell you about column headings, column entries, and they will give you all the examples of what constitutes a table. We spoke about callouts, that the table cannot just appear, ta-da, you have to mention the table in the paragraph above and then the table appears. All the rules are here and you just need to explore them. The good thing about it, it's online, so you can jump from section to section quite easily. Figures would be in graphics and multimedia, so they will talk about effective use of graphics, and you go from one section to another one, and they have examples. They have videos as well, as I mentioned, so they tell you how to start writing your paper using your graphics. Some of them start with the graphics to tell their story, and they're good guidelines here. So this supersedes the book. Do not use the book anymore. You have to use the ACS Guide to Scholarly Communication. This is what is being used right now. All right. I'm coming now to references. And we have the citation elements, which is what we just went through. And they will tell you how to put in different things in your reference list. Okay, so journal titles, books, conference proceedings, websites, online journals. There are rules for everything. There are tables with examples that clear up if you're not sure what they're talking about. And they would also give you these templates that show you what the entry should look like. And they give examples too. Now, there's a quick style guide. There are rules, of course, on how to create your references. So these are the new rules. I have them in the slides, but I'm just showing you where you can get them as well. So you're starting with Arabic numbering. You put the number and a dot, and that's it. Do not use the number and the close parentheses. It's not that. Oh, am I wrong just now? No, this is parenthetical numbering, sorry. So this is what we spoke about. Remember, there were 3 styles: parenthetical numbering for in-text citations, then the superscript numbering, and then the author date. So you have examples for each one. If you choose to use one of them, besides the superscript numbers, these instructions would guide you as to how to do that. Right, going back to references. Now, when you start your reference list, let me go down, right, creating a reference list. It tells you how to do it. So I started saying we use the numbers. The style no longer indents the entries in the reference list. So remember, before they would use hanging indentation. So you would have one, you start with the author's name, and then the second line would be indented, and then the third and fourth will continue the indentation. They've stopped that. You just number it and leave it left aligned. So you're no longer using hanging indentation. Other things that have changed. Before, all the reference entries would end in a full stop. Now, if you have an entry that ends with a DOI or a URL, you no longer put a full stop at the end of those entries. So I'm surprised that some of you are still using that old guide. Maybe I need to form a group and send it to you all directly. Okay. Right, so they tell you about that and then reference managers. We'll talk about this towards the end. So I'm going to go back to the slides and then we're going to come back here to see some examples of different types. Actually, I can just show you here before I go back to the slides. So this is what we call the quick guide. What they do is show you different instances of how a journal entry can be entered. Now, not all journals are the same, and you do not source all journals from the same place. So this one, you probably got it online, and it has a DOI. This one was from a database aggregator. So think about you're searching SciFinder or EBSCOhost, so one of those journals, Web of Science, not journals, sorry, databases, and you find your articles. This is how you would put it in. ProQuest is another one. And then it may be an early publication. So they give you examples of different types of journals and the places where you source them. They also have for books, encyclopedias, and theses, and they give you ebook, book in print, ebook chapter, book chapter in print. So there are different examples, and this makes it so much easier for you all when you have to do your reference list. There's an example for theses, electronic ones, or ones that you access in print. Then websites, newspapers, magazines, all of it, safety data sheets, conferences, and of course, it goes on to the next section, okay? So that's the quick guide. If you don't want the quick guide and you want to actually see the different rules that are happening for each entry, then go reference formatting by examples and source types. And this one, they will take their time and explain to you what happens in the author field, what happens in the title field, what happens in the publication field, and that kind of thing. All right. So here also, if you're not sure, you know, sometimes you are using an online resource and you're not sure what format it is. So journals tend to be easy, but sometimes you're using a report from one of those organizations and you're not sure. Should I cite it as a website or should I cite it as a report? This helps you to decide what type of material you're using and to put it in the correct order. Okay, so you don't have to be in confusion. You can see what it's like. All right, so I'm going back to the slides. So we're going to look at a few guidelines. Now, I've put it in the slides, but I don't mean to overwhelm you. I just need you to realize you have to pay attention to the formatting rules. So things to be that we begin with when we are doing our reference list. The heading is references, not list of references or bibliography, nothing like that. I also need you to remember that when we are putting in formatting in our papers, that we're using a combination of the thesis guide and the style guide. Okay, and for this one, the thesis guide and the style guide say that the heading is references, it's centered, capitalized, and bolded. Now, of course, your references must start on a new page. They are left aligned, so we no longer use hanging indentation. When I say hanging indentation, do you know what I'm talking about? I mean, I'm using the term and I assume that you know, but let me know if you know what hanging indentation is. Okay, good. Right, so hanging indentation is no longer used. Just put your numbering in and leave it as that. When you put your number, each entry, so it would start from 1, there's a period, a space, and then the citation. So you start with the author's surname after the numbering. I mentioned this before that each number in your in-text citation needs to correlate to a reference list entry, okay? I also said this before, not all reference entries end with a period. So those that have a DOI, that's a digital object identifier. It's a particular number that's given to every journal article or maybe a book chapter if it's an edited book. And just excuse. All right. Right. So they no longer, that digital object identifier is a specific number that's used for that article and that article alone. So no other article has that number. And that is a required element when you are dealing with journal articles. So put it in, or the URL. So those entries will not end in a full stop or a period. Author names, all the author names are inverted and separated by semicolons. Of course, after the last author's, after the last author's name, you would put a full stop. Single spacing is advised for your entries, but use 1.5 between entries. That way your references have they look neat. Okay, so single spacing, if an entry takes up 3 lines, we use single spacing there, but after that we use 1.5 between them. This is also an important point, and sometimes writers don't realize that. In the citation, you have punctuation marks. So like after all the authors' names are inserted, you have a full stop. When you have the journal title, the title of the journal, you then put the volume number, the issue number, and the pagination. Each one of them is separated by punctuation marks. After the volume number, if there's an issue number, the issue number goes in parentheses, followed by a colon, and then after the colon, a space, and then the pagination. However, if you do not have an issue number, then you put a comma after the volume number and you run the pagination on after that. So that's what that rule is saying, that if an element is missing or is not part of the entry, then you have to include or change the punctuation that introduces the next one that's following. Some other rules, and all these, like I said, I took it from the guide, the online guide, and I've included this section under which it was found. If you have a work that has more than 10 authors or co-authors, then after the 10th name, you place a semicolon and you put et al. So you do not list 11 authors or 12 or 13, you go up to 10. If the name has a qualifier, senior, junior, second, third, you would put it in after the initials, because remember, you have to invert the author's name. The author's field always ends with a period. And of course, when you have organizations, you would use the acronyms. There are examples for all of these things. You need to go to this section and look to see what they've recommended. This is another one. If the publisher is also the author, you do not list the name in the publication section of the entry again. You just leave it out. We're going to look at examples for these, and then we're done for the afternoon. Well, after the examples, I just need to talk about 2 things. If you are not sure about what type of material you have in hand, these are the sections you would go to. This table tells you how you identify a journal, how you identify a book, how you identify a website, right? There are some guidelines there that you can use. And I showed you this section just now, formatting and examples, right? So you will see what the formatting should be, and then they'll give you an example of what it should look like. So let's start with journals or periodicals. Periodicals is a broad term, of course, and that includes journals, magazines, and newspapers. So what do you take out as the title for these periodicals? You need two titles. One is the title of the article, and the other one is the title of the periodical. So Journal of Biochemistry would be the title of the periodical, and then the article would be something about what the person is writing. Okay, so two titles. The title for the article is set in Roman type. Now I know this is kind of plenty, but this is how you make sure that your references are correct. And you may do it for your paper, but I have to do it for all theses. So we're learning together. So it's Roman type for the article title, but the journal title is italicized. So that's why I say you have to pay attention to spacing, punctuation, capitalization, all those formatting features. After you put the title of the article, you end it with whatever punctuation it came with. If it has a full stop, a question mark, exclamation, you would keep that. And then any special formatting that came with the text you leave. So if there were superscript numbers, not in the sense of in-text citations, but you know you have those marks in the sciences, you would leave them, right? Greek symbols, you do not change them. Some other things to pay attention to, capitalization, headline case, or it's also called title case is recommended. And when you capitalize like this, you capitalize the first letter of all major words in titles and subtitles. And those are just some explanations in case you're not sure. When you have words like genus names, then you know how to capitalize them, right? So the first part of the word would be capitalized. The second part would be in common letters. This one, for the journal title, you do not put the full name. The journal title is usually abbreviated. Is any one of you familiar with CASI, Chemical Abstract Services Source Index? Is anybody familiar with it? Okay, so I see one person, two. Okay, so I lost my place, right. Now, CASI is where you go to find out how the journal title should be abbreviated. You do not just abbreviate it on your own, okay? There are rules and these things are indexed. So you have to go to see how they've indexed the abbreviated form of the journal name. Not every journal you will use in chemistry can be found in CASI. If it's not found in CASI, then just take the abbreviation that the journal gives, okay? So sometimes, I don't know if you've realized that according to your topic, your journal may be coming from PubMed or National Library of Medicine. Anybody ever realize that? If that is the case, then you would use their journal abbreviation. But if it's a chemistry journal, the chances of it being in CASI is very high. Remind me to do a demo with CASI, and you put in the name of the journal, and they would tell you how it should be abbreviated. All right, so don't do it on your own. You have to use Chemical Abstract Service Source Index to abbreviate your journal titles. If your journal title is one word, you do not abbreviate it. So if the journal is biochemistry, you leave biochemistry. If it's science, you leave science. Things to note: the year of publication is in bold-faced letters. Volume number is italicized, but the issue number is not. And if there is no issue number, you use a comma after the volume number, and you italicize both the volume number and the comma. That's why I was saying you need to pay attention, because whatever formatting is done to the element, the punctuation that follows also shares in the same formatting rule, right? So in this case, if you don't have an issue number, you put the volume number, you put a comma, and you italicize both the volume number and the comma. Right. Issue is in Roman font though. So volume number italicized, but issue number is not. Those are some of the things you need to pay attention to. So it's like this. And this is an example of the journal abbreviations again, but this time we have journals coming out from different jurisdictions. So this one, Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, this is the abbreviated form, but there's one coming out of India and there's one coming out of the US. If that is the case, to dispel ambiguity, you would put the place name onto the journal title. Again, this is not, you don't make it up. Go in CASI and see what they've done to tag the jurisdiction onto the journal title. Now, sometimes a journal changes the title. If that is the case, then you use the title under which the journal you're using was published, okay? So this one, the previous title, this is the full name, Experimental Hematology, sorry, and this is the abbreviated form. Now, before it was Oak Ridge, Tennessee, but then it changed to New York, US. So if when you used it, it was Oak Ridge, Tennessee, then you would put that in as your journal title. I know this is a lot of details, but I'm pointing it out so that you know when you create your references, these are the things you need to pay attention to. Now, some in the old guide that some of you are familiar with, issue numbers were left out. And oh, let me just add, title for journal articles were also left out. That's no longer so. You have to put in the title for the journal article. Okay, so before you would put the author's name and then you would put the journal title. No, now you have to put the article title as well. So that's another change. Right, issue numbers are required. Usually, if a journal has continuous pagination across issues, you would leave out the issue number, but that is not the case for every journal. Let me just explain a bit. If a journal has 4 issues for the year, and issue 1 stops at page 100, it means issue 2 starts at 101. And if issue 2 stops at 200, issue 3 starts from 301, right? That's what they mean by continuous pagination across issues. So if it is your journal has that, they usually wouldn't put the issue number, but the issue number is required. So once it's there, please include it. You have to switch from that old guide because the requirements have changed. And this is an example of a journal, right? So this is the general format up here, and these are some examples. You notice this is bolded, the year and the comma that follows it. So those, I know I'm wringing your ears out with a lot of details, but this is what is required for your reference list. This is one where there is no issue number, and this is one with an issue number. So the comma and then the page, wait a minute. This is probably, no, right. This is the volume number, sorry, and then the pagination. So there's no issue number. And in this one, there's a volume number and there's an issue number. So notice what happens when an element is not present. the spacing and the punctuation changes, so you need to pay attention. Another thing to notice when you're using the initials for the authors, they should not be joined together like J.C. No, it's J. space C. Right? If you have one, fine. But if you have two initials, then you need to include a space between them. So for books, again, there are rules for the authors. We looked at some before, so I wouldn't go through that again. The book titles, they are also italicized, just like the journal title, not the article title, the journal title. And you do not abbreviate book titles at all. You have to put it, the full form of it. For edition, the word is abbreviated to ed dot, and it's all lowercase letters, and it's in Roman font. And there are marks of punctuation that you use between each element, right? So just note those things. Publisher name, there are different things happening here. If the publisher is well known, you can use the acronym and you can leave out the place of publication. But if the publisher is not well known, then you need to include the place of publication, right? So you see National Academic Press, Washington, D.C., but Cambridge University Press, everybody knows Cambridge. And for the acronyms, you can use the abbreviations. And these are examples of book entries. This one has an edition statement. This one does not have an edition statement. And again, you need to note what happens when there is one and when there is no edition statement, okay? Notice the edition statement starts from the second one. You do not include the first edition, that's understood. It's from the second edition. The number, you are using an ordinal number. So it means you're using 9th, 10th, 8th, 2nd, 3rd, and so on. The TH is not superscripted, it's on the line. So don't put N and the TH up here, no. In Word, if it superscripts the number, because once you press space bar, it tends to do that, then just say undo and it will put it back on the line, or just click on superscript again and it will put it back on the line. For an edited book, it's a little different. So in an edited book, every chapter has been written by a different author or a different group of authors. Sometimes if you're using the book, you only use the one chapter from the book, and that chapter has been written by certain editors. There are two ways to enter that book in a reference list. If you use more than one chapter, then you may want to reference the whole book. And this is how you would do it. Instead of doing it by chapter, you would do the whole book. You start with the book title, but remember book titles are italicized. The edition number, if there is one, editors, and then you would put the publication details, and if there's a DOI, you include it. Notice this abbreviation for editors differs from the edition for the book. So if you're dealing with editors, it's capital EDS dot. If you're dealing with edition, it's common E, common D. So I draw your attention to those things so that you can note, right? So edition, editors, two different, because if this was only one person, it would be capital ED and not S, right? So common, cap. So this is if you're citing the whole book. The editor does not take the author field, you start with the title. However, if you only wish to draw reference to the chapter that you use one chapter from that book. This is how you would do it. You would put the author or the authors for the chapter, and then you would put the title of the book in italics. But before you put the title of the book, you put the word in, because you're showing that this is a part of this item. In is in regular font or Roman font, but the book title is in italic font. So you need to pay attention. You'd put the edition number if there is one, and the editors, the publisher information, and the DOI. And this is an example here. Now, all these examples can be found on the website. Okay, so you can go to it and look at it. And for this one, I will go to the website and we can see what to do for websites. Oh, actually, I should let you go to the website and find it for me. So when we switch, I'll ask somebody to do it. Let me finish the slides first. Now, I have to talk about this because this is something that's happening in academia. But before I go on to predatory publishing, do you have any questions about the reference list? Now, I only showed you 3 types of resources and not even all of it. That's just 3, because when you are reading for your research, you use more than those, right? I did not do conference proceedings. I did not do reports. I did not do theses, but all those are other resources you may use in your papers and in your theses. So do you have any questions? You know now where to go to get it, so you can see an example of how to do that, or how to do each type of format.
Hi, Ms. Smith.
Mm-hmm.
Quick question. So, EndNote software, right? Does it follow the updated version of the referencing software or the referencing style? Sorry.
I have a slide with EndNote. Remind me to talk about it there.
Okay, no problem.
Okay. So I'm leaving referencing now and I'm going to predatory publishing. It still has to do with referencing because sometimes you do have predatory work in your work, right? You may not always know, but we do have a database that you can check to see if the journal is predatory. Now, the list is not exhaustive. And you also need to pay attention to the type of violation that that was listed by Cabells. Cabells is the name of the database. So some of them are minor, but even if they're minor, try avoid using them in your paper. Now, it's not just when you're writing, but if you publish in a predatory journal, there may be consequences. Now, it's referred to as predatory, deceptive, or black publishing. And this is because it's an exploitative academic publishing business model. What happens is they will send you emails and they will bombard you. Publish with us, publish with us. But there are certain things that you need to check out before you publish. Now, number 1, if the name of a well-known, reputable journal is biochemistry, they would just add a word or 2 onto that name. And if you know how the human mind works, you would see biochemistry and think, okay, this is the journal. So the journal might be biochemistry. They will do something like International Journal of Biochemistry, right? And if you're not doing your checks, or if you don't know the real name of the journal, you can get caught. So you have to be careful. So that's one thing they do. And then these are the other things. They charge you a fee to publish, the processing fees. No checking of articles for quality and legitimacy is done. Sometimes you can't even find an editor, and there's no peer review process. So you have to go to the website and check it out. Remember, you are publishing your work. Also, if you publish in a predatory journal, it's usually recommended that you take it off your CV. So therefore, be careful. All right. And they promise you things like quick turnaround time because, you know, we have the open access initiative now, which is what predatory publishing is piggybacking on. It's not that open access is bad, but they're using it to trap writers or authors. So be careful. So they will tell you you'll get your work published in 3 to 4 weeks. No, no, no. Be careful with them. And now they even have predatory conferences. And in these, you go, they will tell you, oh, we have any conference. It's usually near to the legitimate conference. They don't give you hotel information. They say it will follow. They don't tell you what the agenda is and so on. If you take the time to look, you would see that something is wrong. All right, so that is one way to know that it's predatory. We have 2 research guides created by librarians, and I've included the links here so that you can go and check it out and see for yourself how to identify predatory journals and conferences. And this is the database I was referring to, Cabell's. It's in our database A to Z list. You can go there and check it out to see if the journal is good. Right. Now, to do these references and in-text citations, you may want to use referencing software. These are just a couple listed here. EndNote, Mendeley, Zotero, Microsoft Referencing. This is the one I don't really recommend. I don't find it's all that accurate, but I know students still use it, but I don't really recommend this one. EndNote. The university pays a subscription to EndNote, and it's available in every lab on campus. Apart from that, you can download it from My eLearning and put it on your personal computer. Okay, so you can have access to that. Now, we have not had EndNote training last year because there's a guide created by Dr. Rennick that you can use if you want to learn how to use EndNote. However, EndNote, when you come to formatting the elements that go into the reference list, not every feature has been pre-selected. That means you have to go in and edit the output style. When you edit the output style, then you can say save, update, and it will change it in all your reference entries. Let me give an example. In ACS, the journal titles, as I said, are abbreviated. But if you notice, EndNote is putting in your reference entries and the full titles of the journals are going in, it means you have to go into EndNote and select use abbreviated title. And only when you select that, then, and you update, then it will change the full form to the abbreviated form, right? So those things you can do after. The video is basic enough that you can follow. If you need further guidance on editing the style, well, then you can contact me. So it's supposed to have the latest ACS. I checked the other day and we tried to download ACS Guide to Scholarly Communication. We couldn't find it, but then when we looked at the output, it did say ACS Guide to Scholarly Communication. So if you have the latest EndNote, yes, it is updated to reflect the guide that I showed you. Okay. The thesis template, it's not some of the formatting and the referencing is not formatted for ACS, but you can still use the template and just change up the things that you need to change to ACS. Instead of going through the whole thing by yourself, you can use the template and you can still use the template and just change the referencing. You don't have to use the referencing that we put there because that's for Chicago. But some of the rules still apply to you. So if you want to use the template as is, then you can feel free to do so. All right, so some things I promised to do. just now. Right, we spoke about the quick guide, and I'm going back to the quick guide, and we spoke about websites. So I did not include an example because you can just come right here and see how to cite a website. And they give you different types of websites, right? So it gets to be too much on a slide. So I said it's better to just come here and show you it. So this is a quick guide, and you can see how to insert a document from a website. But if you want the full explanation, we go to the examples by types, and we can see what they say about creating an entry for a website. You have to do a bit of scrolling because it's a really long list. Of course, I can do Control F and find it as well, but there's no harm to watching the other. See, blogs, Twitter, because, you know, blogs are also created by universities, right? Conferences. You can go here, come here. These give the explanations and the examples. So if you want that, theses and dissertations, then this is where you would come. Government docs. Now, why did I choose something that's so far down? But we have the quick guide, and you also have here, see, images and figures. Again, they have more examples about that. I think I probably passed it. Yes, I think I did. But nonetheless, the examples are there and you can find them. Oh, 23, so I really passed it. Right, look at here, online sources and websites. And you would get the examples of what to cite, what not to cite, and how to insert information for a website. Okay, so I can't put everything in the slides, but I've at least put a marker telling you where you can find it. Of course, you can also explore it in your own time. There was something else I said I would go to. Let me go Google, and I would put. Right, I spoke about CASI, and this is the tool, the chemical abstracts tool that you would use to see how to abbreviate a journal, right? So let me just get back. Where I mentioned CASI and get a journal. So if you are not sure how to abbreviate a journal, then you put the journal inside here and you say search. And this is where they will tell you, you would choose the one that you want. So say it's the one from the US, and they would give you the abbreviation right here. Okay, that's how you get the abbreviated form of the journal title. And if CAS doesn't have it, CASI, then you can take what the journal gives you, because not all journals are in CASI. Remember, not all journals are chemistry, so you will not find them. So this was the other thing I had to show you. And there was one thing else on Word, but was there any other online thing I had to show you? I can't remember. Let's stop share. And I am going now to share on Word. Let me just get my reference list. Right. All right, so this is the last thing I will be sharing. References. So this is a reference list in alphabetical order. Are you seeing the reference list? I need to know. Yes? Okay, good. Right, so I'm going to change it from hanging and put in numbers. So I don't want hanging, but I am going to trouble. So this is my thing here, right? Let's go with these here. I have my references and you're going to number them. Remember, it's just the number and the dot. So we're going to put that in. And then we're going to do the spacing. So I said that it needs to be single within and 1.5 between the numbers. So I'm going to go back to paragraph. I don't want, well, hanging there is for the numbers. So I'm going to say single line spacing. That will be for within. And then I'm going to set the after to about 18. And I say, okay. And that's what it should look like. Okay. So it's neat. Some people prefer justify. Some people prefer left align. It's up to you, but just know that when you use justify, that you can get that where it spreads it out and it looks very unseemly. So if you don't mind, you can use left alignment for your references, but your text of thesis or your paper, you could use justify if you want, okay? All right, so that's about it for this session. I know these sessions tend to be very intense because you have to pay attention to so many things, but I don't expect you to remember everything. What I want to do is draw your attention to the fact that formatting entails a lot of details, and you have to pay attention to the details in order to get your references correct. Okay? So are there any other questions? You can feel free to unmute and speak if you wish. Okay, so if there are no other questions, thank you for attending, and the session would be shared with you as well as the links. They will be part of the presentation, so you can access all those documents. There was one thing I was to show you, where to get Cabels. I now remember it. So just bear with me. Let me just show you that one thing. I'm going to go to the Alma Jordan Library. It's under collections, our databases A to Z. And see Cabels. You scroll until you get it. So it's Cabels Predatory Reports. And then you can enter the name of the journal. You can also enter the ISSN, which is the International Standard Serial Number for the journal. And it will tell you if the journal is there or not. So I can put in, let's use that one, algebra and logic. Let's see if it's there. Now, it's not showing up here, right? So you can assume that it's not predatory, but still check out the journal's website. But let's look at one that was deemed predatory. So Academic Open Computational Linear Algebra Research Journal. So you can click on it and we can look at the violations. And they will tell you if this violation is severe or minor. But I would advise you, If it is that the journal is listed in Cabell's, avoid using the journal. That's the safer thing. Now, sometimes the journals are taken off the blacklist, but don't chance it. Just don't use it. You must get information some other place. All right, so this is Cabell's, and you can use it to check out journals to see if they're predatory or if they are safer to use. And links to all of these are in the slides. So if there are no more questions, thank you again for attending, and I hope that you now know which style manual, which version of the ACS style manual to use.